So we're going to do things a little bit differently tonight. So this panel is meant to be quite interactive. We're going to start off with some questions that our moderator has prepared, and then we'll let you ask questions. And we're trying to do this in a way that's bilingual. So bear with us, this is an experiment. We're going to try to make it work. So before we get started, and before I hand over the mic over to Natalie, just wanted to remind you about our code of conduct and how we behave. So basically, we can only share this amazing science with you if everybody in the room feels safe and welcome. So we're going to talk a little bit so just take a second to read what we consider to be unacceptable behavior in this space. So basically, we won't tolerate any form of harassment, bullying, intimidation, or discrimination of any sort. And that includes if it sounds as if it's a joke. Let's just try to behave like we would in a professional context. So instead, what we'd like everybody to do is to treat everybody with kindness, respect, and consideration, and value that there is a diversity of views and opinions in this room. And all communication should be appropriate for professional context. If at any moment you feel uncomfortable, or if you see something, don't hesitate to contact us. Our email is up here on the screen. You can take if you want to take a screenshot, you can. But yeah, so at any time, send an email, we will be monitoring that address. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Natalie, who will be our moderator for the night.
All right, thank you. My name is Natalie Willette. I am the Deputy Director of the Trottier Institute for Research on Exoplanets at the University of Montreal. Just before we start, as Carolina mentioned, we're going to try to do this accessible bilingually. Could I get just a show of hands? Who is comfortable in English? Raise your hand. All right. Who is comfortable in French? Raise your hand. I love it. Lots of people that raise both. Thanks. Qui est confortable en français? Très bien. Je pense qu'en français.
On va poser les deux questions.
Poser les deux questions. Qui est confortable en anglais?
La personne qui parle pas anglais.
Ah,
Elle n'a pas compris ta question.
Ah, ok. Si c'est demandé francophone, oui. So we're going to try and have things accessible in both languages. We're going to be speaking mostly in English, but with the French translation of things on screen when they've been pre-prepared. There will be a chance for you to ask questions at the end. At that point, I will translate your question verbally to the other language. And then we will have two great volunteers at the front who will be frantically summarizing the answers in the other language. It's going to be summary. It's going to be broad summaries. So as we mentioned, it's going to be an experiment. So bear with us. So I wanted to start with the land acknowledgement. McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. Now, I would like to note the special attention that should be given to this land acknowledgement, given the topic we will be discussing today, first contact. As we push the boundaries of our known world into space and explore ever deeper, it's important to reflect on how exploration, first contact, conflict and collaboration, and now truth and reconciliation have been done in the past and should be done moving forward. So let's strive to learn from experience, be active listeners and conscientious humans, and explorers into the future. So the reason why we are doing this panel today is actually at McGill University for the last few days, there has been a workshop on the Fermi paradox. Who has heard of the Fermi paradox? Qui a déjà entendu parler du paradoxe de Fermi? So we will go into what that is exactly, but this workshop basically brought together specialists from different fields who are looking into questions about first alien contact. And with space exploration moving forward faster than ever, this new space race that we have towards the moon and towards Mars and even deeper, many different disciplines are coming together to try and explain the age-old question, are we alone in the universe? So tonight, this panel gathers three specialists from three different fields who have very specific knowledge to help build a roadmap to try to get to this very first detection of alien life and maybe even first alien contact. So biology can help us, can help tell us what we should even be looking for in terms of alien life. Astrophysics can guide us on the way to detect this alien life, and linguistics can hopefully help us to figure out how to communicate with such life if we were to come into contact with it. So I mentioned that we're going to be doing this bilingually as much as possible. I will start with some questions that I prepared for our panelists, and then we will be doing audience questions afterwards. So our first panelist is Jessica Coon. If you can just go ahead and grab your seat. She is a professor of linguistics at McGill University and is a Canada Research Chair in Syntax and Indigenous Languages. Her work focuses on the range and limits of cross-linguistic variation among human languages, maybe alien languages one day, with a special focus on Mayan and Iroquoian languages. Her expertise in linguistic fieldwork and language universals led her to her role as the linguistics expert consultant for the 2016 Denis Villeneuve film Arrival. Who's seen Arrival? Yeah, Denis Villeneuve Arrival, yeah. Great movie. So she's basically Amy Adams.
This is me.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Next up, we have René Doyon. Grab your seat. René Doyon is a professor in the Department of Physics at the Université de Montréal and a Canada Research Chair in Experimental Astrophysics and Exoplanetary Sciences. He's also the director of the Trottier Institute for Research on Exoplanets and the Observatoire du Mont Mégantic. He develops state-of-the-art instruments, including the Canadian NIRISS instrument aboard the Webb Space Telescope, to discover exoplanets and study their atmospheres, with a long-term goal to detect a biosignature, which is a spectral fingerprint of biological activity from an exoplanet atmosphere. And last but not least, Jackie, if you could grab your seat. We have Jackie Gordial, who is an assistant professor of environmental microbiology and an astrobiologist at the University of Guelph. Her group investigates microbial diversity and activity in extreme environments on Earth. Her group's research helps shed light on what life could look like on cold planetary bodies in our solar system, such as Mars or the moons Europa and Enceladus. So without further ado, I will start with questions. I have some questions that are for specifically one of the panelists, but if you have any thoughts that pop up in your minds, feel free to jump and add any points if you'd like, and some of them will be for all of you. So the first question I have is for all of you, and it is, why do you think humans are so fascinated with the question, are we alone in the universe, or is there anyone out there? Jessica, if you could start.
Oh gosh, the universe is huge, right? It's really, really big. And so I think it is a natural question to be fascinated by, right? How special are we as, as a planet that is full of life?
Yeah, and also it's all about our origin, right? So where are we coming from? And everyone are fascinated by the sky, right? At night, in the summer, you watch the night sky and see all these, thousands of stars. In fact, a lot more than that. And you can't just not ask yourself the question. There's got to be other planets out there, and people like us. It feels really lonely to think that we're all alone in this universe. So yeah, I've never seen anybody not fascinated by these questions. Are we alone?
Yeah, it seems to be a very human question that's shared by all of humanity across cultures, across time. This really is a shared human question.
Sorry, there's just a technical. Okay, all right. Carolina will fix it. It's an experiment, remember? Okay, so Jackie, I wanted to get your thoughts. What can we learn about what alien life might look like based on the life that we have here on Earth? Because we basically just have a sample size of one. How do we know what to look for when we're looking for alien life?
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying that I'm a microbiologist, so my viewpoint is slightly biased, and that I really, really care about microbes. And of course, microbes are not the only life that we have on our planet. We have a diversity of life forms. We look very different, bipeds look very different. than this child who looks very different, that microbes look very different, so there's a diversity of form on our planet. So it's very hard to constrain, but how I think about this, is really thinking about physical constraints. So a lot of my research program and a lot of the way I frame this is, what's the coldest temperature that life on our planet could survive in? What's the hottest temperature before membranes start falling apart or proteins can no longer hold themselves together? So just really thinking about those physical constraints. Is there a pressure that's too high? And by thinking about those physical laws and those physical constraints on our sample size of one, that can help constrain how we may be thinking about life on other planetary bodies.
Have you been surprised in general by how resilient life seems to be on Earth? Or do we kind of have a cushy home?
I think we have a cushy home, and that, I think that that's also a bit relative, so things that, for example, we may consider to be quite extreme, a microorganism may have no problem. In fact, they may actually prefer it. So thinking about high temperatures or pressure, for example. So life on our planet does seem to be resilient. But to answer your original question, it doesn't quite surprise me. But that's based on my sample size of one and what I know about life on our planet, which is, I've always been taught that it's resilient and that life finds a way. For anyone who's watched Jurassic Park, right? If there's a niche to occupy, life is going to occupy it. And so we can only hope that something similar can apply outwards on our planet.
And you mentioned that you focus on microbes. So in terms of finding alien life, would you think looking for microbes is our best bet rather than very complex life?
I think that if we assume that life may happen in stages, you kind of go from something, maybe an abiotic chemical that then goes into, a simple life form that then kind of increases in complexity. Microbial life may be maybe lower hanging fruit to find on other planetary bodies, certainly within our solar system. But again, my viewpoint is a little bit biased from where I'm coming from.
Very valuable. All good? I'm just okay.
Madam, you seem to be here just to talk with each other. It's not fair because everyone gives you the replies, but we don't necessarily hear everything.
It's a volume thing?
No, for example, when she replies to a question, she's looking at you.
Okay, we'll look at you guys.
Everybody.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you. Okay, next up for Renee. We've discovered nearly 6,000 exoplanets in the last few decades. How many of these actually look promising in terms of harboring life? Should we expect habitable worlds to be common throughout the universe or not?
Okay, well, first of all, 6,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but just to calibrate yourself, there's about several hundreds of billions of stars just in our own galaxy. Okay, and we estimate that, from the 6,000, we now have good statistics. We can say that at least several tens of billions of stones have planets that are potentially habitable. Okay, so the prospect of having other worlds much like ours are huge. Now, buddy questions, what are those planets that we can actually study? Turns out not that many. We can only study those that are very close to the sun. And right now, the best machine in town for this is the James Webb Space Telescope. And actually, it's about that size. It's a handful of, planet where we can study in details. And it's hard. It's not something you do in a few hours worth of observations. It's going to take several thousands of hours of observation during the lifetime of JWST, several years. But the good news is that we know how to do it. And I'm also looking for microbial life, because even though microbes are, very small, they can influence the atmosphere globally. So the oxygens that you breathe comes from photosynthesis, from phytoplanktons in the oceans, plants. And so the small organism has a global effect. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to detect the atmospheres of these planets and what we call the biosignature. So oxygen, things that are, or methane, things that are produced by biological activity.
Would it be possible for you to tell from a biosignature whether something was advanced or not advanced in terms of life?
Well, for what we're looking for, we're really looking for, again, microbial life. And so we will not be able to say whether there's aliens out there that are, are actually, building telescope, trying to watch us. So we're really trying to detect biological activity. So, and it turns out to be, microbes are the, if you look at the history of the Earth, they've been there for billions of years, whereas us, animal life started only 500 million years ago, and humans a few millions. So really, if you want to, and we're not special. What's special about life on Earth it's bacteria, right?
Is it a question?
Possible?
Is it related to this point specifically? Sure, go ahead.
As a microbiologist, I'm interested on that. But can you imagine detecting some form of industrial pollution on an exoplanet?
Donc la question c'est, est-ce que ce serait possible de détecter quelque chose comme la pollution industrielle sur une autre planète?
Est-ce que je prends en français?
Your choice.
En français. La réponse c'est oui. Une des choses qu'on est capable de détecter dans l'atmosphère des deux planètes, ce sont justement la présence de nuages et aussi des aérosols. Donc, théoriquement, ça peut être possible. Maintenant, ça peut être difficile de distinguer des aérosols qui sont produits de manière naturelle par la photochimie, mais en principe, oui, c'est pas impossible.
All right. So next up for Jessica. Oh, no. I'm just supposed to on the next slide. For Jessica, what can we learn from first contacts that have happened between human civilizations and peoples in history here on Earth to prepare us for a first alien contact? Is there a limit to how applicable these past experiences can actually be?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think we can think about sort of two kinds of answers to this question. One is sort of a more cultural, sociological, and then one is a more linguistic one. And I think on the cultural, sociological side, as related to what you spoke about in the introduction, we don't have a very good track record as humans with first contact, right? I'm thinking about colonization, I'm thinking about slavery, I'm thinking about issues that are not in our history, unfortunately, but are like very relevant to current topics happening right now and right outside of this building. So I think this is something that we obviously have to be very thoughtful and aware of as we think about potential first contact with extraterrestrial life, right? If it is so apparently easy for us as humans to other humans to the point of all of the atrocities that have happened throughout human history, how easy will that be for us when it comes to alien life? Especially if we're thinking about the need for resources or the need for space to expand to if we screw up this planet. So I think there are important lessons to be learned from our behavior as humans throughout history. From the linguistic point of view, I mean, one thing that we have learned about human languages as we have researched and documented more and more of them is that human languages, so there are around 7,000 languages, different languages spoken in the world today, many of which have their own dialects. So there's a huge range of linguistic diversity. But as we look more and more closely at these languages, we actually have learned that this diversity is very limited, right? So human languages vary. They vary in very interesting ways. Each language is unique. It encodes a wealth of cultural information. They're important to people's identities. But at their core, the structure underlying all human languages is not very different, right? So now if we start working with a language that nobody has really worked with before, we're not surprised very often. Languages tend to fall into sort of certain patterns, right? Once you learn one property about a human language, you can start to predict a number of other properties about it. And this isn't surprising, right? Because we all have human brains. We all have the same human cognitive capacities. If you take a human kid and you drop that kid off in any other, you expose that kid to one or more other languages, they're going to learn those languages. So, the working hypothesis behind all of this, linguists call universal grammar. Of course, they did not have the entire universe in mind when they invented this term, but this is the idea that our human brains are really hardwired with the building blocks of language, and that language is, in some sense, basically the ideal solution to the problem of we have certain cognitive abilities, we have thoughts, and we want to externalize them, right? So there are constraints on how we think and what we think about, and things like our memory load. There are constraints on our human vocal tracts, or on our hands, and if we're talking about human sign languages, our facial expressions. But within those parameters, it seems that each human language is the optimal solution to the need to communicate what we have to communicate. So now when we think about contact with aliens, there's no reason to think, I imagine, maybe this is a question for you guys, that they are going to have the same kinds of cognitive systems that we have. But I guess the assumption would be there's going to be some kind of systematicity, and whatever their communication system is, it's going, because we're talking about biological systems, they're going to be optimal solutions to the mix of their cognitive abilities and how they are able to externalize their thoughts, right? And exactly what form that will take, I think we can use our imaginations. I don't know, but probably it's, I imagine, it's not going to look like a typical sort of Star Wars scenario where everyone is basically in human form, but maybe they're blue or they have some bumps on their foreheads, but they all have human vocal tracts and make the same range of sounds. Like, that seems pretty unlikely.
They're way too human.
Yeah, so I think that's important to think about sort of what are the range of imaginable scenarios for how extraterrestrials might communicate, and whether we would be ready for it, or whether our human brains would even be up to the task.
Did you have any thoughts on that? Maybe Jackie, like one follow-up question on that is, how likely would it be that evolution on another planet would nudge living beings, advanced living beings, to look like humans?
I feel completely unqualified to answer that question, and based on the conversations that the group of scientists over the past few days have been having, I'm under the impression that there may be no one who's capable of answering that question. We don't know. We don't know if the way that life on our planet evolved this way because this is a fundamental path for how evolution goes, or if it's just luck. You know, is this just some things happen to be in place, and this is what we popped out with, and we don't know.
Yeah, I'm not expert in the field, but you know, this sprung of animal lives came about 500 million years ago, the pre-Cambrian explosions, and at that time there were something like 20 potential body plans that could have emerged, and it's only one, the fish, essentially. So we look like fish, right? We have, you know, this is our fins, but basically we evolved from that. And so, yeah, you can imagine that alien life are way different than us, but you may imagine that they are things similar to us, you know, 2 eyes, it's much better than 1, right? For stereoscopic visions, but otherwise, we don't know. Those things are very useful for building things.
Well, like 2, it could be 3.
Yeah, it could be 3, yeah.
Could be 8.
Exactly.
Well, there's such a diversity of life forms on our planet, and so to me, it's not even so much a question of the form, like it's bipedal form, but does this become associated with our brains and our ability to think and manipulate and form abstract thought?
But one thing that fascinates me and intrigued me is the communication aspect, and how they communicate. And it's I would like to think that they have common things to us, you know, mathematics, things like this. So, but I don't know. We don't know.
And maybe just to wrap up with you, Jessica, is there anything we can learn from animal languages and the diversity of that, and humans trying to communicate with animals on Earth?
Yeah, good question. So as a linguist, we define language pretty narrowly as human language. So animals absolutely have communication systems, and some of these communication systems are very complex, and this is not my field of expertise. So please fact check me. But my understanding of a big difference between human language and animal communication systems is our ability for abstraction and our ability for displacement, right? So we know that animals can communicate about things that are in their environment, right? They can talk about where food is, they can talk about where danger is. So maybe it doesn't have to be their, immediate location. But as far as we know, animals are not talking to each other about what they want to have for breakfast tomorrow, or, what if this hadn't happened, then what do you think would have happened? So they're not talking about impossibilities. They're not creating fiction. They're not lying. They're not speaking in metaphors, right? And it's this ability of humans to create fictions, to create sort of imaginary structures and, political system. These are the kinds of things that we don't seem to be finding in the animal kingdom. And this human specific ability that we have for complex language and for talking about abstract things and hypotheticals, as far as we know, this emerged, when human language emerged, which people guess to be around 150, 200,000 years ago, also around when cave paintings emerged, when mathematics emerged, right? So what a lot of linguists believe is that this was a specific genetic mutation. We just got lucky, right? This happened, and then we got the ability to form complex sentences. We got something like recursion, the ability to create infinitely long sentences, right? I could make a sentence that is infinitely long, or eventually I would die, you guys would go home, but we can keep going in a way that doesn't seem to be possible with non-human communication. So yeah, I think there are some major differences there. And I think that's also something that I've really been struck by over the last few days, is thinking about, it's not just that we're looking for potentially complex life. We need complex life who got this like magic gene adaptation that allowed them to think about what's out there in outer space. Like, what if we build some rocket ships or some telescopes to look for it, right? And that's something that we don't seem to find elsewhere on Earth.
So the next question is for all of you. Some scientists and philosophers have cautioned against trying to communicate with intelligent alien life. Stephen Hawking was one of them. Given what we've seen can happen when civilizations meet for the first time on Earth, yet we have been sending messages out in space for several decades. The Voyager Golden Disk, radio messages. Do you think we should be trying to contact aliens? And if so, are there any precautions we should be taking? Whoever feels inspired.
You guys.
Reassure us or make us afraid.
Yeah, I think we should try. I mean, that's the, we explore, we observe exoplanet with our telescopes. So that's an obvious form of exploration. So yeah, I mean, I think we should try to communicate with them. And I maybe I'm too naive, but I don't believe in these aliens being, nasty, want us to eat us. And especially, especially advanced civilizations that, we get to a point where we are, wise. And so, no, I don't think we should try. We're certainly trying to listen. We have not listened yet enough, I think, to be sure that they are out there now.
Yeah, and I don't know if I could say we should or should not, but similar to, the first question about thinking about why do we think about life on other planets and life out there, I think that this is also a fundamentally human thing, is this exploration and this drive to know what else is out there. And part of that may be reaching out, right? We don't, as a species, we're not solitary, we reach out. And so this is yet another form potentially reaching out to not be alone.
It's just before I'll let Jessica answer you.
Sure, let's try. I don't have very complex thoughts on that. That seems, I don't know. You don't think we should be at all scared? What if they're nice, but they have some germs and it just wipes it out?
Well, okay, well, the thing is that,
And then they feel bad, but it's too late.
Space is so huge. So, I mean, at least we have some time before you can actually, get to us. So that for that, I'm not too worried. So, but the communication is one thing. But going out there and, you know, try to conquer that, that's another thing. That is a more tricky question. So, and it's a very important ethical question. Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned in the last few days is that you know, there's people doing space travel technology right now. You know, this guy's here, does that for a living. There's people also building self-replicating machines, and you know, we're only maybe a few decades for these things to exist. So it's not science fiction. So very soon we'll be able to go out there. But the question, should we go out there? That is a different question.
And there are people specifically thinking about that, sitting
Exactly.
right next to him.
So I'm on it. So if we know there's this planet as life on there, and like Mars, you know, let's say we drill in Mars and we find there's life there. My gut reaction was, okay, hands off. We don't go there anymore. We should not go there because already, I mean, we take precautions to sterilize our spacecraft, not to contaminate the biosphere, but it's not perfect. But as soon as we find life on Mars or anywhere in the galaxy, it should be hands off. We should not try to, you know, colonize the galaxy. It's a bad idea, I think.
About the, go ahead.
We must not forget that for the last 70 years, we broadcasted in the cosmos, radio, TV. They know us if they are listening.
That sounds scary.
Of course, yeah. This is called leakage. You know, the radio signal is it's been sent for several decades, and there's now, and we were estimating several thousands of stars that now are you know receive our signals.
But it sounds like our panelists are mostly optimistic.
Yeah.
So next up for you, Jackie, we often talk about searching for alien life as we know it here on Earth, something that looks like what we have on Earth. How likely is it that alien life might not look like what we expect at all? And then how can we search for it if we don't know what it would look like? Could we miss it altogether?
We totally could miss it altogether. It's very difficult to quantify what you don't know. It's very difficult to estimate what those unknowns are, and we're notoriously bad at thinking about what our blind spots are. There's a concept, so we heard about biosignatures earlier from Renee. Specifically, that was in the context of you know, looking from far away, but biosignatures can also be molecules that we associate with life on our planet. And so there's a concept called agnostic biosignatures, where instead of looking for a very particular type of molecule, so DNA is an example. A lot of our life on our planet has DNA, all of it has DNA, but there's no reason to believe that a microbe or another life form has DNA specifically. So rather than looking for DNA as a biomolecule or a biosignature, we might look for a biosignature that has some of these properties. So is it a polymer or, you know, a chain of complex molecules that seem to have a pattern that's maybe self-sustaining? I think ultimately there's, even within the past few days, what is a biosignature? There's a lot of disagreement about even just what a good biosignature is. And the reality is there may not be one single biosignature that's, you know, the smoking gun for this is for sure life on another planet. It will probably come with several lines of evidence that all point together to being some form of life. And that's especially important if we're thinking about life as we don't know it. So we look at life as we know it because that's our example, and it's an opportunity, it's a foothold for which to look out, but it's very difficult to think about life as we don't know it.
So it sounded like you were talking sort of about what we could call a false negative, where we don't identify something as being life, but it could be life. Could either you or maybe Renee talk about the danger of false positives, where we find something that looks like life, but it might not be life?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, I mentioned oxygen, which is you know, very difficult biosignature, but it's quite you can have what we call false positives. So you may have a planet rich in water, and with the UV radiation, X-ray associate the molecule water, it's hydrogen, hydrogen goes out in space, and then you're left with a oxygen-rich atmosphere, and which may not be due to life. And so we really have to look at the context. So the good news is that we're capable to detect several molecules. We can detect CO2, methane, and it's really the ratio of these molecules and the physical condition, the temperature that will tell you, okay, what we're seeing here looks something like that may be produced by life and not really abiotic processes. And just to warn you, the very first claim of a biosignature will be extremely controversial. And it will not be admitted as such that this is life. It will probably be independent discoveries in the independent system that look a similar pattern. And now people will start to think, okay, what we see here looks very much like, I mean, the simplest explanation we have for what we see there is life.
Do you have any follow-ups on that, Jackie, or?
Well, one thing I'm thinking about right now is, besides just disagreements on what, on biosignatures, I think the scientific community even has disagreements on what the definition of life is. Right, and so viruses are a great example because they have genetic material, they have a chain.
Was there like a huge fight during the workshop about what is life?
No, we're just,
Chuckling?
we're stepping on each other's toes with our
Okay.
cursors.
And one of the things mentioned here is that, well, in the context of actually trying to detect these things, well, I mean, you James Webb, $10 billion, at some point you need to design the damn thing. You need to decide what you're going to do. So you need to, commit to yourself, okay, I'm gonna look for this, I'm gonna look for oxygens, and so you design your instrument to do this. So in a way, we're really biased to detect, what we know, but we have to acknowledge that there are really strong biases.
Speaking of the James Webb Space Telescope, Renee, what kind of technology aboard the JWST makes it uniquely positioned to help us on our path to detecting alien life? What kind of even more advanced technology would we need in future missions to get closer to first detection or contact? And when will that happen?
Okay, so JWST has 4 stages. Then what you've seen mostly from JWST are these incredible, beautiful images. But, it's not, I mean, the majority of the data taken by Webb is not images, it's actually spectroscopic data. And so Webb has instrument that are especially designed, for example, that's the case with the Canadian Bill instrument, to detect exoplanet atmosphere and also determine its chemical composition. So, what was the question again?
Technology aboard JWST
Okay,
makes it
okay, so we have the technology to detect atmosphere. So detecting biosignature, the key word is atmosphere. So what we're trying to do is, first of all, detect the atmosphere. That in itself would be a big deal. I mean, we routinely detect exoplanet atmospheres from, hot gas giants. Those are very easy to do. But, cold, temperate planet, those are really hard. And we have yet to do this. But the good news is that we know we can do it. It's just a question of time, enough of observation to do it, and probably spanning several years, and we'll get there. So I like to think that by, a decade or so, by doing a lifetime of JWST, we'll be able to point a star. Okay, here's a planet. It's right in the habitable zone, and it's got CO2 on it. We have measured there's an atmosphere in there, and there's CO2, and maybe we know there's probably liquid water on its surface. We should be able to have this kind of answer. Whether there's a biosignature, that's another question. Now, what will come in the future? I mean, James Webb is not even launched, we're even thinking the next big thing. One of the big flagship missions called the Habitable World Observatory, which will be a successor to Webb, that will look for, this time, try to take images of these exoplanets and take spectra of them. And in that way, we'll be able to probe the hundreds of those and find out, whether they have atmosphere like Earth. But even closer to us, on the ground, there's also the development of giant telescope, 40-meter telescope, and in particular the extremely large European telescope, which will be in operation by the end of this decade. And we're building an instrument on this that will be capable to detect the biosignature. The closest planet that is habitable to the sun is Proxima b, only 4 light years. And with that instrument, we should be able to know with one night, about 7 hours, whether it has an atmosphere like Earth's. And about 300 hours, a lot more time, whether it has oxygen. So, and that will happen within maybe a decade. So you see that we'll have a technology very soon to have, serious answers to this question, whether we can detect or not biosignature.
Because when I joined iREx about 5 years ago, you told me alien detection in the next 10 to 15 years. So that leaves us in the next 5 to 10 years. Are you thinking with that?
I said a few decades. Syllables. But seriously, no, I do maintain that statement that, you know, within our lifetime, within mine, we'll have some answers, some, whether these close planetary systems have an atmosphere and, you know, potentially biosignature. Whether and, you know, even if we're not that, they don't have any, that would be, it's a big question.
For Jessica, what is the best way for humans to prepare for different scenarios of an alien first contact and how to communicate with them? What kind of plan would you draw up for us? And if you could make your dream team of specialists, who would you recruit? What kind of specialists? Or it could be specific people if you'd like.
Funny, because one of the things that I did get to do on the film Arrival is there's a whiteboard somewhere in the background, and the set design team said, okay, imagine you're Amy Adams, you've just been flown in, and you're in charge of, you know, 50 of the world's best linguists and cryptographers, and you need to write a to-do list on the whiteboard. Go. I was like, whoa. Okay, what can we do to prepare? Who do we need? I think we need all hands on deck for this. They're here. We're talking.
They're
to them
here,
They're here.
they're ominously floating
Ominously
over.
That's Gary's arrival.
Okay, so they're here. We're gonna need linguists, we're gonna need cryptographers, we're gonna need data scientists, we're gonna need big data, right? I mean, ideally, we're gonna want, well, we're also gonna need anthropologists, we're gonna need sociologists, we're gonna be wanting to interact with them. This is the best way to learn another language, is to be able to interact with a speaker or with multiple speakers. And so ideally, we'd want to somehow reach a shared understanding that we want to communicate with each other and that we want to learn each other's languages, assuming that we want to do this, which seems like the right move. We're going to be friendly. We want to try to talk to them. And we're going to have to start small, right? We're going to have to start with trying to understand, how do we refer to basic concepts in our immediate environment? I mean, it's very rare now that linguists engage in monolingual fieldwork. So fieldwork where there is no shared contact language, but this is what you would do in that situation. You know, you start with things that we can point to and name and identify. That might be very challenging if they don't have any of the same obvious body parts, or maybe they don't have a word for meeting owl or chair, because maybe they just float ominously and don't sit in chairs, right? So, but maybe actions, or it's going to be tricky. I think it's going to be tricky. So we're going to need somebody interacting with them. We're going to need to be recording everything and ideally crunching through a lot of language information in whatever form that comes out, whether it is audio, whether it is, you know, audible to our human ears, or whether we need some special instruments because it's outside of a frequency range that our ears can hear, whether it's manual if they have hands, or could it be that they communicate by smells. These kinds of things came up in over the last few days. So we're going to need to be ready for everything. I mean, I think that means we're going to need all kinds of, I don't know how you record smells, but somebody must know how to
Not my notes.
do that. And then ideally, we're going to be wanting to, you know, crunch through a lot of language information and try to find patterns and see if we can find a way also to communicate back. And this could be a big challenge if we can't, say they communicate by sounds. This is one thing that I liked about Arrival. Like I mentioned, you know, not humanoid vocal tracks. So how are you going to reproduce the sounds if you want to try to interact and practice speaking? This is the best way to learn a language. We practice speaking with other speakers of the language, but if we can't reproduce the right sounds, how are we going to do that? Or is it through writing? And then maybe we have more hope. But I think we have to be ready for basically everything. And we're going to want a lot of experts around.
Do you think artificial intelligence could be used to help us, or would that be a mistake?
I think artificial intelligence would be a good way to look for a lot of patterns. How much more it can tell us, I don't know. I mean, what we know about ChatGPT is it's very good at reproducing language, given a huge amount of input, right? Given lots and lots and lots of data, it reproduces sort of remarkable looking language, but it's not doing the same thing that human kids are doing when they're acquiring language, right? Human kids are acquiring language with very, very little input. They do not have like the entirety of the World Wide Web as an input. They're getting, very little input, and they are filling in the blanks, and they are acquiring a language. And so, will AI be able to talk back to the aliens? I don't know if we want that. And I don't really know what it would tell us. I think it could be an interesting tool in terms of looking for patterns and trying to sift through lots of data. But I don't think we just want to turn ChatGPT loose and tell it to start speaking to the aliens. Who knows what it'll say? It's not always right. Follow-up question?
In trying to speak with the aliens that are floating up there,
Yeah, okay.
the sapir word hypothesis could apply that context. in that
Yeah.
scenario.
This is a great question. So the question is about the Sapir warp. Sapir warp, SAPIR hyphen WHORF, yes. Sapir warp hypothesis, also known as linguistic relativity. This is, of course, a big plot point in the film Arrival. So this is the idea coined by the linguist Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Whorf back in the early 1900s, that the language you speak constrains or even determines your view of the world or what you can think about, right? And among human languages, this is not true, right? So this has been shown. I know some of you look surprised. I'm sorry, it's not. You can learn other languages. It's not going to radically change your view of the world. Different cultures exist, yes. Absolutely, but they are not directly connected to the structural properties of our languages. And again, this connects to the fact that we all share sort of basic cognitive infrastructure in our brains. You can take a human kid and put them in any other language environment, they're going to learn that language. And so the idea, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, when it comes to human languages, at least the strong version of it, that learning that the language you speak determines your view of the world, this is generally not accepted anymore. There are interesting sort of very small ways in which, having more vocabulary from one thing or another might give you slightly better reaction time. So there's lots of experiments that look at reaction times for things like, does this language have more words for blue? And if so, are those speakers better able at distinguishing different colors of blue? Yes, but we're talking milliseconds, very small. And we're not talking about, do you see time circularly or linearly? I mean, that's where Whorf came in, right? He said that the Hopi people had no words for time. That's not true. And that they saw time as circular. Okay, what about other life forms that are not human? I don't know. I mean, I think this is a really interesting question. Is, as I mentioned earlier, language is going to be directly connected to sort of the limits of any life form's cognitive abilities. Different, variation in cognitive abilities might, or cognitive, I don't even know what to call it, cognitive predispositions, might certainly result in languages that behave differently, but could we then learn a language and change how our brains are wired? I don't know. Some people ask whether I made the language for the film Arrival. I didn't, because I don't know how to make a language that lets you see the future. And I don't think anybody does. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. But I do think it's interesting to think about whether we would actually be able to fully understand another life form ever, right? Like, I don't think my cat is ever going to fully understand me. We interact in certain ways, but I think there are things that she's never going to quite grasp. And we might be the cats for some future aliens where they're just like, oh, these poor people, and they're not going to get it.
All right, I have one last question for all three of you before I open up the floor to the audience. So you've been discussing with many other specialists over the last few days about the search for alien life and the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox states that if there is a high statistical likelihood of alien life existing, humans should have detected signs of it by now, yet we haven't. Basically, it asks the questions in the words of Enrico Fermi himself, where is everybody? So what is your take on this paradox? Should we expect to have detected something by now? And what does it mean that we haven't?
I can start. I mean, it's a personal opinion. I mean, one main argument about this famous paradox is that, you know, the fact that at some point, you know, an alien civilization will be able, us, very soon, in fact, will be able to have these so-called von Neumann machine that can replicate themselves. So let's suppose that in some not too distant future, we're capable of doing this. Now, we would be able to send that probe. It would go to an asteroid and then it would just land there and then replicate itself, and maybe they would have a radio antenna. Hey folks, I'm here. And you can do the math. It takes a few million years to colonize the whole galaxy. Now, you may ask the question whether it's ethical to do this. I disagree. We should not do this. But there's tens of maybe billions of civilizations in the galaxy. You only need one to do it. So the fact that we don't see these artifacts suggests to me that we're probably rare. So I'm not talking about microbial life. I believe microbes are everywhere. I think given the conditions, life sprung out everywhere in the universe, and we should see these biosignatures. But aliens, things that can send radio signal and build radio telescope, that I'm not sure. For example, on the Earth, I mean, dinosaurs were here for what, a few 100 million years. They've had a few 100 million years to build radio telescope. They did not. So what happened? So it's not clear to me that, you know, complex life to the level of being able to send radio signals are very common. So we may well be alone in our galaxy. So that is very disturbing. That may be the case.
Well, maybe we're the first.
Sorry?
Well, maybe we are the first.
Yeah, exactly. We would be the first in our galaxy.
Somebody has to be the first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, and everything I'm gonna say is also my personal opinion, and I don't know that we've been looking very well or for very long as a species. I think, you know, so there's the, have we been looking? Are we doing a good job of it? Or, you know, have we been doing it for long enough to cover the vast amount of space that we have to, you know, are we just, you know, we looked at meter the wrong direction, and actually there was a signal right there, you know, I think there's a lot of just luck aspects to this as well. But, you know, even thinking about an alien life that's similar to a dinosaur, could we detect a dinosaur on an exoplanet?
No.
So, you know, so maybe it's there, but we just don't have those tools.
Yeah, I guess I'll add that I came into this last couple days of workshop thinking, oh, this really is surprising. Like, if the universe is so enormous, where is everybody? But then talking to biologists and planetary sciences and sort of really getting a deeper understanding of how lucky it is that we are here at all talking about these things, right? Because how long has there been complex life?
500 million years.
500 million years. Okay, when did we get the ability for language and abstract thought? Like 150, 200,000 years ago? It's not a very long time. And then how long do, you know, planets live before an asteroid hits them or their sun burns out? So we might be very, yeah, sorry. It's not going to happen anytime soon, as I understand it. But yeah, maybe we're alone, which just means maybe we should take sort of extra good care of. We've got a pretty good thing going.
Yeah.
And the Fermi paradox is sort of reliant on this idea that the life is abundant, but some scientists believe in the rare Earth hypothesis that life is quite rare instead. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the rare earth hypothesis is that yes, microbial life is very common, but complex animal life is not. I just gave the example of you know, dinosaurs being there for hundreds of millions of years, and had it not for these asteroids, they would probably be there and be dumb and happy, right? So it's
Have
not.
you seen velociraptors in Jurassic Park?
Yeah,
What they can do?
They are very clever, yeah. So who knows? Maybe they would have developed technology. But the rare earth hypothesis state that it's not necessarily given that, complex animal, that the complex animal life is obvious. I mean, on Earth, I mean, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. But it's only in the last 500 million years that we got to that cells got together to make complex life. So I'm not an expert in biology, but it's not obvious that these things just sprung out easily.
Any final thoughts on this? All right, so we're gonna open it up to the audience now. All right, so questions, yes.
What's about the zoo hypothesis?
What about the zoo hypothesis?
They are somewhere, but see us evolving. As a microbiologist, I work in lab, activity history, astronomy, amateur is my main domain. Can you just imagine that life is so precious that they are not allowed to touch us? But yeah,
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it relates to the point that I made that, maybe we should be very careful if we realize that there's life out there, that not try to invade them, right? Let's not, expand our galaxy with our human technology. So, yeah, at this stage, everything is possible. I mean, some people even argue that, these artifacts out there, it's just we haven't looked yet, right? It's maybe in the asteroid belts, and but it's not easy to go there and watch whether there's artifacts out there. And it's not even also obvious that we would be able to recognize these artifacts. They would not necessarily be monolith, right?
Any thoughts, Jackie, Jessica?
I agree, it's a possibility. There's no way to rule that out. Yeah.
When I hear zoo hypothesis, it makes me think of, for the Trekkies out there, the Prime Directive. And I don't know how many of you have watched Star Trek, and maybe if we had a sociologist, they would be better equipped. How likely is it that humans or an alien species really respect the Prime Directive? We see that they're always breaking that rule in Star Trek. It's very hard to stay hands off, so how likely would that really be? Yeah.
Seems hard. It seems like you need a certain level of ambition to get off your planet. And then, what does that mean? If you're a very ambitious life form, might that extend, and might that also have negative consequences? Might you be tempted to break the Prime Directive?
Yes.
Hi, I wanted to thank you guys for answering all our questions, and I wanted to say I'm far from being a scientist, so I grew up being very, very afraid of space, and so I think many of you would be very proud to see me asking a question. But how would you guys explain that for several years people have come out saying that they've seen like spaceships or crash, like some foreign object crashing? We've been talking for 45 minutes about how there's no proof of anything, but then people on Earth are like, I've seen things. How do you guys, that dichotomy is so strange to me. How do you guys explain that? Are we just crazy?
Donc comment expliquer les ovnis, les histoires qu'on entend d'avoir vu quelque chose dans le ciel, des artefacts qu'on aurait trouvés d'extraterrestres?
Well, one thing to say first is that in the vast majority of these events, they can be explained by natural phenomena. Very often this is Venus or an aircraft. But I grant you that some of them are not that well explained. But that doesn't mean that if you cannot explain something that it has to be extraterrestrials and intelligence. So there's a simple example in history that took time to understand these phenomena, and it just shows that we have yet to better understand nature. But of course, yeah. But we just have to be careful not to jump to these wild explanations of ETs. I mean, it could be some natural explanation too. I mean, in all actuality, it's a very simple natural explanation.
For like a military exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Things that are kept in secret, so that adds to this uncertainty.
But when military people come out and say, like, I know things, like there's documents, like, what do we do? Yeah, I mean, hard.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on the list, right?
No thoughts, Jessica? You want to stay off the list. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I'll speak in French, it's easier for me, but doubling down on what she said. I wanna know, like.
That's
if,
right.
je vais le parler en français.
Really confused.
Est-ce que ça commence à circuler dans les domaines scientifiques, les claims qui ont été faits devant le Sénat américain? Justement, Chuck Schumer qui voulait passer la loi qui aurait forcé le Pentagone à défense a révélé que oui, le Pentagone a bien eu contact avec des civilisations avancées qui étaient déjà sur Terre par le way. C'est très sérieux, là. C'est pas de la foutaise, là. Est-ce que ça commence à circuler dans le courant scientifique? Parce que là, il y a Abby Lowell avec le Galileo Project, l'astrophysicien de Harvard. Et là, je sais qu'il y a plusieurs astrophysiciens qui ont commencé à se rallier à sa cause, des gens de CETI aussi. Est-ce qu'il y a une ouverture d'esprit sur cette question-là?
So the question is it starting to circulate or becoming more acceptable in scientific fields? There were hearings about the Pentagon in front of the US government, I think last year. A.D. Loeb is mentioned also with the Galileo project and his explanation of the Oumuamua object being interstellar, all those things. Is that starting to become more acceptable in scientific fields?
I mean, I'm not too much aware of what you're talking about, but all I can say is that we're all scientists. And what we want is evidence. So I'm very open to anything, but at the end of the day, we need evidence. And so far, we haven't had any evidence that, there was these aliens.
Est-ce que, parce que mon problème, c'est qu'il y a une grosse dimension sur cette question. Que genre les UFO, les aliens seraient déjà, mettons, visiter la Terre, si on veut. Mais je pense que la majorité des scientifiques voient ça comme un peu, c'est de la science. Mais là, il commence à avoir des gens sérieux qui disent, c'est pas tant de la science comme ça, mais dans ma question, c'est plus pour avoir des preuves, justement, il faudrait que les scientifiques commencent à regarder. Ma question, c'est plus est-ce que les scientifiques commencent à être curieux de regarder et d'étudier ces questions. Parce que là, il y a des gens très sérieux qui disent aux États-Unis, c'est pas de la science, c'est vrai. Je ne veux pas discuter là-dessus de est-ce que c'est vraiment pas. Est-ce que les scientifiques sont ouverts maintenant à commencer, OK, on peut être curieux de commencer à regarder plus proche sur Terre que genre à 10 années-lumière. C'est plus ça ma question.
So just the follow-up is, are scientists more open to studying these phenomena and trying to find an explanation?
Again, of course, we are open, but the question is that some people have faith in something. They just don't want to accept that the answer may be something they don't like to hear. So, this famous case of this alien that was apparently found in some aircraft, which was, it's the 51 thing. It's been shown after the fact that these things were just fake, right? It was fraud, but it's been around in the pop culture for decades that those things were potential aliens. But again, scientists are all open to look at evidence. But coming back to your point, that aliens may be with us. I mean, yeah, I mean, we can't exclude that, but we live in a universe with the same laws of physics, and it's very difficult to travel with interstellar space. I mean, if you go to the closest star that has a planetary system, Proxima b, with current technology, would take several 10,000 years. If you do it very fast, and some people try to do that here, it may be a few hundred years, but it's very difficult to do this. But that doesn't include that they've never done that. But so far, we don't have very strong evidence that they've been around.
And to follow up with A.D. Loeb, studying aliens was not his expertise, and he decided to shift into that direction. And people have done follow-up studies on his data, his studies, and have always found more plausible explanations. I wouldn't say that he's having a great time recruiting a lot of people in terms of scientists, so he's out there, he's trying things. If he finds something compelling, we're all willing to listen to him. But up until now, his science has been a lot of data massaging and trying to get the answer he's looking for out of the data. Yes.
I have a question about belief systems. So I'm wondering what you think, like, do you think maybe our modern use of science or theology might be the best approach if, let's say, intelligent life come in contact with us, or maybe more of a religious approach would be better, because I mean, although it seems a little clear in academia, it's still very recent structure, and it's very clean, whereas religion is much older. So I'm wondering if that might be a capable way of like seeing, of trying to understand, you know, creatures that will, if they came in contact with us, would more or less look like demons or angels, they would probably so.
Donc, la question, c'est est-ce qu'il y aurait des leçons à apprendre, des choses pertinentes, des systèmes de croyances comme la spiritualité ou la religion qui sont très anciennes, qui pourraient nous aider dans les contacts ou la recherche de la vie extraterrestre? These are getting intense. These questions
Well, I can say, I mean, we had the last few days, Catherine here, she's the expert. But what I would say here is that I think we need everything. So, and all these questions about, you know, life elsewhere in the universe, it's, as we said at the very beginning, it's all about our origin. And, you know, then we immediately meet up with religions, and that's fine. So I don't see that we should exclude one or the other. So it's I mean, the social life and the existence of life in the universe, it's not just a question to scientists, it's a question for everybody. So it's a social problem, a big one. Am I summarizing it well?
Yeah, I think that's it. All hands on deck, you know, meet spirituality in there.
Yeah.
That's really important, especially given the land acknowledgement that we heard at the beginning. That was such a great reminder of first contact and colonial principles. I think that even just that framework for the scientific endeavor is an important one to be reminded of.
So actually, my question, was sort of, it's closely related to this. So I think that what strikes me listening to you guys is obviously, you know, you brought it up at the beginning, we have one sort of data point, right, basing everything on Earth. And then we have immense amounts of human bias. So, you know, you mentioned dinosaurs and microbes, we care about them because they are not corresponding to our expectation of what we expect how life to be like. So, I mean, the question is obviously, you know, in microbiology, there's a diverse set of things that you're looking at, and I mentioned the extremes of our planet to get on, you know, but broadly, like, how do we expand human scientific thinking, just think beyond what we done? And obviously, we know for human history ourselves that it's absolutely necessary. You know, how many cultures, how many societies that we've been for hundreds and hundreds of years, because we did not have that capacity to look beyond and, I don't know, have a sort of scientific reasoning that was beyond our own experience. So I don't know if this is sort of cross domain really, but it's striking. And like for me, I know Jessica, you mentioned that animal communication systems are not your area of expertise, which is completely fair enough. But you know, you were mentioning the list of things you need, people you need when you're trying to decipher an alien language, and we as a society we have a huge domain, and people are doing this with like whales for evacuation. So I mean, it's kind of sad that we're spending not enough resources on that type of thing. That would serve as a nice model for obviously much more interesting communication systems like that. So I don't really, it's more of a comment, I guess. I don't know if I have a specific question per se, but I don't know what your thoughts would be on something like that. Like, how do we sort of move away from our traditional scientific methods? Because for a question like this, obviously we need to, abandon a lot of them, or we can abandon a lot of them that would give us enrichments.
Donc, la question en résumé, c'est, on a entendu beaucoup parler de la vie telle qu'on ne la connaît pas sur la Terre. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on peut penser au-delà de les limites et contraintes de la pensée humaine, scientifique, les paradigmes qu'on a en ce moment, pour essayer justement de trouver ces formes de vie qui seraient différentes?
At the comment, and maybe, I think the scientific framework isn't a static one, as you just said, you know, we've come a long way, and I think a similar perspective is we're going to continue going somewhere as we learn more, as our technologies change, as we learn more about the natural world around us, as we're more sensitive to things that we haven't in the past, you know, being aware that science is a colonial endeavor, you know, for example, that hasn't been thought of in that way before. So I think our science, the way that we will do our science will continue to change. That's part of science, right? We are continually changing how we think about things, get more information, and we adapt. And I think that I have faith that that process will continue, and I don't know where it will take us.
Yeah, I subscribe completely what you do, and just to add that, you know, for example, the question of detecting life. You know, the only thing we can do right now is try to detect life as we know it. Now, maybe it's not going to work, and in that process, we're going to learn something that may, you know, send us somewhere else. So science is not, you know, this linear process. It's not like a zigzag. Sometimes you go backward, and then you know, so it's not something linear. So you have to try things, but something may be a dead end, but it will probably, you know, go somewhere else.
Yeah, and absolutely, people should and do study whales, right? I don't, but there are people out there researching all kinds of animal communication systems, and this is also going to be really important to our sort of broadening our understanding of what it means to communicate.
Could you comment on the great filter solution to Fermi's paradox? And can you tell me if we should be worried about it?
Donc, la question, c'est est-ce que vous avez des commentaires sur la théorie du grand filtre, qui est une solution possible au paradoxe de Fermi, et est-ce que ça devrait nous inquiéter? I guess you discussed the great filter over the next.
I don't know what it is.
So
Well, did you want to explain it?
I mean, I could try.
Or I can summarize it. So the great filter is essentially to say that there is some kind of cataclysmic event that happens in the lifetime of advanced civilizations.
Oh,
And it kills off almost all of them. And either we are before it, and our doom is ahead of us, and we're going to get killed before we can get advanced enough to communicate with anyone, or we are after it,
oh, I
and
see.
everybody else is dead.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, that's the history of Earth. I mean, the Earth has had, you know, catastrophic events. You know, the dinosaurs. There's been mass extinctions on the history of Earth that, you know, has sapped, you know, life. Yeah. So and it happened all the time, and it may happen in a different way with our civilizations. I mean, who knows how long we have as civilizations. So and that's one of the big questions about the Fermi paradox. How long is a technological civilization before it got extinct by, you know, itself? So we may I don't want to be too optimistic, but we may not have that long on this planet.
Okay. Nothing to add.
It's something to see.
Number two.
I had a question. It sounds like there's some, not agreement, belief that the most likely discovery will be microbial, or evidence that strongly suggestive of microbial life. How then, what's the next step on that? To passively, without sending a von Neumann probe to land on there and potentially contaminate it, how does one gain significant information? We don't know if there's going to be dinosaurs, the difference between a dinosaur and algae. What are the kind of the limits of the technology and knowledge right now to be able to differentiate life at that most likely level where it's going to be found?
Well, first of all, I
gotta translate.
Yeah.
La question, c'est, donc on semble être d'accord que c'est plus probable de trouver la vie microbienne. C'est quoi les prochaines étapes ensuite? C'est quoi les contraintes? Est-ce qu'on peut différencier les types de vie qu'on peut identifier? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait après?
I think you and I will have maybe slightly different perspectives on it, because we think of biosignatures, our go-to biosignatures are probably a bit different. And you're looking at atmospheres, which may be, you know, which will show the byproduct of metabolic life.
Right.
And I think a lot about life within our solar system, and where within our solar system, we could potentially have microbial life, just based on what we know about life on Earth. And so thinking about Mars, it's a cold and largely dry planet. We have cold and dry places on our planet that have microbial life. Enceladus, Europa, these cold places that may have salty water, that also life on our planet can totally handle. And so you know, that would, sample return would be amazing, that would be an amazing thing, and then, but then we do have to care about contamination, and there's gonna be a lot of ethical conversations, because we have to make sure we don't, and we've seen this on our planet, for example, there are lakes that have been isolated for millions of years in Antarctica, and by the just trying to sample them to investigate this, what we think is unique and isolated life on our own planet, we contaminated it, and so any insights that we get about that life are called into question because of how we sampled it. And so I think these issues are going to become very, very important when we think about those next steps, and we're going to have to think very carefully about that. And my answer is surely going to be very different.
No, I agree completely with you, because in fact, we've been talking too much about exoplanet, in fact, because there's also possibly defining life in our own solar system. And I completely agree with you that if we have a chance to, understand more about life and its diversity and, different genetic code, whatever, it's to go on Mars and Enceladus and Europa. Now, if let's say we find life in our solar system, that would be extremely, it would be a great discovery. But if we do that, then the next thing, okay, we have that elsewhere. So that's where we have to look at travel. We have to look with telescopes remotely, and also in our solar system.
Any thoughts, Jessica?
Yep.
Hi, is astrobiology, is it a very fast growing field compared to other scientific fields like medicine or I don't know, other fields? And where do you see the field of astrobiology being in, say, 10 years? Like what changes do you predict in the field?
Donc, est-ce que le domaine de l'astrobiologie évolue très rapidement comparé à d'autres domaines?
I'm not doing I'm not in medicine, so but I guess it's going to go as fast as technology, these telescopes that we're developing, and but the astrobiology is not just about astronomy. It's about microbiology. It's about communication. It's the social aspect to it. So it's difficult to answer your question. But it's definitely a very important field of research. It's gets interest of many people.
It's very interdisciplinary, right? Even just looking at these panelists, and we really are such a small subset of the 20 people that were here this week, which are a small subset of astrobiology. There's just so many disciplines. I'm trained as a microbiologist who has applications to astrobiology. I didn't get a degree in astrobiology, and in fact, I'm not even sure if there is a degree granting institution that offers a degree in astrobiology.
Is that something that might show up, maybe, or is it?
I mean, there are. It sounds like there are.
No, there are some, right, Nick? Yeah, there are some.
American universities.
It's not very common, but there are some.
Wait, is there? I will take one last question from the audience. Yeah.
Est-ce que vous pensez que l'humanité est prête à se faire confirmer qu'on a un contact avec une base sexuelle? Puis, si oui, ça serait quoi l'impact? Puis, est-ce que vous pensez que ça pourrait être une des raisons pourquoi on peut encore de confirmation et en contact avec une base sexuelle? L'impact potentiel sur les choses.
So the question is, humanity ready for a first alien contact, essentially? Yeah. Well, what are the repercussions first alien contact would have on human society?
I don't think we're very ready. It doesn't seem like we're in a great place right now, really, in terms of, sort of general polarization,
That's my opinion.
Seems like we need to get our house in order a little bit before we work too hard to invite anybody to come visit us.
That's my point. I don't think that we're ready. If I was the one in charge, I don't know if I would,
Yeah, and this is why this question goes just beyond astronomers, microbiology. It's also a social problem. It's our problem. And and I think we need to prepare for this, because I mean, science is proceeding very fast, and one day it may happen.
Yeah,
we may have this incredible discovery.
And we'll take one last question from online.
Okay. So the question is, are they looking at phosphorus poor areas as well as rich? Phosphorus is needed to make DNA RNA.
Qu'est-ce que vous cherchez?
I mean, is DNA a great biosignature? Is there any reason to suppose that DNA is the only, it may not be, and there's many people that are trying to think of outside of DNA. For agnostic biosignatures.
No additional thoughts on phosphorus?
I never have thoughts.
Okay, so I will end with one final question to you, to all three of you. If there's one message you could send to aliens out there on behalf of yourself or humanity, what would it be?
We're trying.
I only know the answer.
You know the answer?
Yeah, of course, it's 42.
Okay, all right. Jessica, we're trying. That's your message. We're
Yeah.
doing our best.
We're doing our best. We probably need some help. Do you have any tips?
Is this on behalf of yourself or humanity?
Yes. Cool.
Are you biological life or artificial life? And the answer may be after 200 years. I don't understand your question.
Jackie?
Yeah, don't eat us. I don't
That's the message. Don't eat us.
know.
All right. Okay, so that wraps up our panel. I want to take this moment to thank our three panelists, Jessica Coon, Jackie Gordiel, and Renee Doyon. Yeah. I also want to thank Professor Nicholas Cohen, who organized the Fermi Paradox. Workshop. I want to thank volunteers and members of TSI and iREx who helped with organizing, especially Carolina and Mahiev. I want to thank our generous donors that help fund TSI and iREx activities, especially the Trottier Family Foundation. We can applaud them. And finally, I want to thank you all, our audience members, for your great participation. Maybe the panelists will stick around if you have a few extra questions, if you want to rush them. Did you have any announcements to end? All right, thank you so much for coming out and have a great evening.